Hi, my name is Ayesha Karim, and today I will be talking about prenatal exposure to valproic acid and its effects on social interactions using operant conditioning. Autism spectrum disorders are mental health conditions which can severely impair an individual's anatomy and social skills. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, described the main characteristics of ASD as persistent lack of social connections as well as repetitive interest. Previous research has found that prenatally exposing rats to valproic acid have resulted in the offspring being born with autism-like behavior. VPA is a crystalline compound used in medication for bipolar disorder, epilepsy, and migraine prevention. The researchers revealed the results of a social discrimination test for VPA rats. It suggested that VPA causes a dysfunction of dopaminergic neurotransmission in the mesocortical limbic circuit, leading to the observed social deficits in autism. Further, researchers suggest VPA increases the D2 dopamine receptors in the nucleus accumbens during adolescence of rats, possibly causing autism-like behavior. However, the study didn't examine whether VPA-exposed rats would show social deficits when tested under operant conditioning circumstances. This study proposes the question, would VPA-exposed rats have less social interactions when tested with socially motivating operant conditioning task under drug conditions? We aim to investigate the consequences of exposing rats to VPA and testing them under two conditions, drug condition, no drug condition, with an operant conditioning task which uses social motivation as a positive reinforcement. It's hypothesized that rats exposed to VPA prenatally would be less socially motivated to perform the task. Also, the rats who are exposed to both VPA and drugs would display the least amount of social play behavior. 40 female Woodstow rats would mate overnight and be monitored for pregnancy. The pregnant rats would be shifted to independent housing under controlled conditions. After 13 days of pregnancy, the rats would acquire a single intrapreneural injection of either saline or valproic acid. 21 days postnatally, one male rat per litter from different litters would be collected. A total of 8 male rats would be used. For this experiment, a 2x2 between subjects design would be used. There would be 4 subjects in each group and a total of 2 groups. The 2 groups are control and drug. There would be 2 stages, a training stage and a testing stage. The first independent variable is the type of grits the rats were from, and the second independent variable is the condition of the experiment. The dependent variables would be the frequency of pouncing and play responsiveness. All social play behavior of the rat would be scored using Observer 3.0 software. The behavior would be recorded using a USB recorder connected to a computer monitor. The operant conditioning chamber would consist of 2 compartments, one active lever, one inactive lever, and automatic doors. Drugs used would be valproic acid and methamphenidine hydrochloride. For the statistical analysis, we would be using one-way analysis of variance, which is ANOVA. All the experiments would be performed under red light conditions. During the training stage, the rats would be randomly allocated with a test buddy from a different home cage. The pair would include one test buddy from one test buddy and one experimental rat. These subjects would be habituated in a test cage for 15 minutes, during which they were allowed to explore the cage freely. After this period, the rats were isolated from their buddies for 5 days. 2 consecutive days during these isolation periods, the rats would receive shaping sessions. If the experimental rat approached the lever, once an acute light was on, the levers would retract, the door would open, between the subject and the buddy. After 2 minutes of interactions, the door would close and the experimenter would put the rat back into the starting compartment. This process would be repeated 7 times for each session, and each rat would receive 2 sessions. If no active lever pressing was performed during the session, the animal would be required to do another one. After the training stage, we would move on to the testing stage, where the rats would be separated into a control group and a drug group. The drug group would be injected subcutaneously with meth 30 minutes prior to testing. The lever pressing would start under a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement, which would include the active lever being pressed, followed by acute light, retraction of both the levers, and the door opening. The subjects would get 2 minutes to interact, then the doors would close. A house light would illuminate during a 25-second inter-trial interval. While the lights were on, the experimenter would have to put the rat back into the starting compartment. Once this task was acquired, the rats would move on to the positive reinforcement schedule task. The PR schedule, each rat received 1 session per day for 5 days. The rats would need to achieve a certain level of lever pressing response rate to open the door. The response rate would progressively increase every time the door opened, so the reward would go 1, 2, 4, and so on. Once the requirements were led, again, the cue light presented, both levers retracted, the door would open for 1 minute. During this time, the rats were allowed to freely interact with their buddies. If the rat failed to do this within the first 10 minutes, the PR session would end. So to investigate the consequences of VPA and drugs on rats, we would measure the average frequency and social play behavior. After, we would use ANOVA to compare the means. Figure 1 demonstrates my expected pattern of results for pouncing behavior. The control group would show an increase in pouncing behavior after 24 hours of isolation in comparison to the drug group, which is expected to show a decrease in pouncing behavior initially. However, an increase in pouncing behavior is expected after 24-hour isolation. Figure 2 represents my expected results after all 4 means have been compared. For the control group, I would expect the rats with saline exposure to demonstrate higher levels of prey responsiveness compared to VPA-exposed rats. The overall prey responsiveness for the control group would increase after 24 hours of isolation compared to the drug group. Initially, the drug group is expected to show a decrease. However, after isolation, they might show an increase. The VPA-exposed rats would be expected to show the least amount of play responsiveness. It is expected that this study would yield similar results to the study conducted by Archibald and Schiavi. The control group are predicted to show a higher frequency of pouncing behavior after 24 hours of isolation. It has been found that there is a relationship between the amount of social interaction and social isolation. Implementing a longer social isolation period would enhance the rat's need for social play. Further, it is assumed that there would be no difference between the control rats and the control saline rats and the VPA rats, which aligns with the results of the social play test conducted by Schiavi. Changes in the levels of dopamine are suggested to affect the motivation for reward. Injecting rats with substances like meth that increase dopamine intracellular levels would increase their motivation for play. However, the effects of meth on the prefrontal and subcortical limbic noradrenaline reduces the rat's capability to actually perform these actions. Thus, the rats injected with meth are expected to show a decrease in pouncing behavior, aligning with Archibald's theory. According to the study, rats prenatally exposed to VPA show an increase in D2 receptors in the nucleus accumbens, which may affect the rat's social play behavior. This graph shows the VPA-exposed rats have an overall low frequency of play responsiveness. Although it may increase after isolation, it would still be the lowest. As stated previously, pouncing behavior reduces after rats being injected with drugs. So the rats injected with meth would stimulate these dopamine receptors, but reduce the capability to actually socially play. It's assumed the drug group's play responsiveness would decrease after initial drug injection. However, after 24 hours, isolation, there may be an increase. For rats injected with VPA and drugs, their play responsiveness is expected to show a slight increase after isolation, but would remain overall the lowest. Previous research has found a positive reinforcement schedule is used for as a method of measuring the motivational properties of rewards. Implementing a PR schedule allows us to measure whether rats were socially motivated or not. The desire to press the lever for social reinforcement demonstrates that social play has had numerous reinforcing properties, such as maternal, sexual, and aggressive. Further, depriving the rats of social reinforcement prior to the operant conditioning task would increase the likelihood of the rats being socially motivated. However, despite all these socially motivating factors, VPA-exposed rats would be still less inclined to press levers compared to saline rats. Previous studies have reported that prenatally exposing rats to VPA induces various abnormalities and social impairments in their children. This may include structural malformations, autistic-like behavior, or reduced abilities to comprehend social interactions. This may be caused by changes in cognitive functions of the brain, such as the sudden increase of D2 receptors, or a failure to assign a positive value to the social experience due to a failure of their brain reward. These results have led to rats being unable to properly understand, perceive, or even respond to social cues. Finding out whether VPA affects rats and causes autistic-like behavior may encourage future researchers to limit the use of VPA. Previous studies have reported that VPA does cause autism-like symptoms. This experiment would allow us to find out how drugs such as meth affect the social capability of autistic rats. By doing so, we may be able to translate this research into humans. Further, by exploring the effects of drugs on autism, we may be able to develop treatments accordingly. These treatments may include pharmacological treatments or increasing sociability among people with ASD. These are my references. Thank you.